So can scientists really determine the age of the Earth? Because we get different variations of how old the Earth really is, and all of them seem to be different. Can we get any narrow it down, or it's just impossible because of this carbon?
Well, this
is there also more than one carbon type measure, like carbon 14, and they have other carbon.
Yes, yeah, carbon 14 to carbon
readings.
Yeah, but leaving all the carbon to one side and getting into non-living things in this business of trying to find out the age of the Earth through the rocks, dating the rocks, you're dealing with billions of years, basically, for the measurement of the radioactive decay in these substances, and that makes it places the whole thing in an area that is basically beyond human comprehension. So, from what I have read on this, and I'd like to give you an example of it in a minute, the people that measure by these processes come up with dates from everything from 0 or less than 0, which is interesting, to billions of years for the same substance. I've actually gone with an outstanding author on creation science, Ian Taylor. His book's there on the shelf.
In the Minds of Men.
In the Minds of Men, or Darwin and the New World Order. I went with him to part of the University of Toronto one time, and where he asked the chap to explain how they did this. And they get results that vary by billions of years. Everything from 0 or less than 0, if you can imagine it, to billions of years old for the same rocks. They'll often ask people when they send in a sample for analysis, how old do you want it to be? And then they will choose. Now, you may think that's funny, but just listen to this. Here's an example. This is from a book that you can get called The Evolution of a Creationist. It's written by Dr. Job Martin, and he was a professor who's some of his students challenged him to examine the claims of creation. And he thought this was ridiculous. Evolution's a fact. You have to be an ignoramus not to believe in evolution. But they persuaded him to examine some of the evidence. And he calls his book The Evolution of a Creationist. He evolved. I take it this is not a transmutation, but a mutation into a creationist. And he wrote this very interesting, I think quite a good book on the evidences for creation and some of the problems with the theory or hypothesis of evolution. And here's a section where he deals with moon rocks. And this gives a really good example, I think, of what I'm talking about. When the first moon rocks were dated in the early 1970s, I think I was mentioning to you earlier, Brad, that when Armstrong was at first landed on the moon, one of the first questions they asked him is, how deep is the moon dust? Because if the moon really is 4.5 billion years old, and the solar system's 4.5 billion years old, there should have been probably 70 to 100 feet of moon dust. Mm-hmm. And of course the answer, as you know, was there's just a scuff, maybe an inch or so of 2 or 3 inches at the most of moon dust. And anyway, this has to do with moon rocks rather than moon dust. When the first moon rocks were dated in the early 1970s, NASA published the age of the moon rocks at 4 to 4.5 billion years. Several years and many rocks later, they published a range of dates for the rocks of our moon at 3 to 4.5 billion years. Now that's 1.5 billion years variation there. Mm-hmm. Okay, this author, that's Dr. Job Martin, called one of the geologists who dated those rocks, and the conversation went something like this. I noticed in a recent news release that the dates of the moon rocks have been adjusted to a range of 1.5 billion years. That's 3 to 4.5 billion years we were just talking about. That's a pretty big difference in the dates. Was the range any greater than that? Oh yes, the range went from several thousand years to over 20 billion years.
Big difference, yeah.
Slight, pretty good dating, I would say. Pretty accurate evidence here, yeah. Okay. Well, then why did NASA only publish the 1.5 billion year range instead of the full 20+ billion year range? We did not want to confuse the public. Don't confuse us with facts. You know? No. We didn't want to confuse the public. We know the moon. We know the moon is about 3 to 4.5 billion years old. So we called the dates outside, we culled the dates. That is, we eliminated the dates outside of that range, discordant dates. We culled the dates outside of that range, discordant dates, and threw them out. So here's what you've got when you come to radiometrics. That is measuring age by process of radiation and what happens to the radioactive content of materials. When it comes to carbon-14 dating, they're, as we mentioned, often fairly accurate and often able to be validated by other means. But when you come to measuring the ages of rocks, you can get anywhere from 0 or less than 0, so it hadn't even come into existence yet, to billions of years. How do you come to any conclusion from that? Examples that have been given.
I think you gave an example to me one time in the recent volcanic reactions, where they've gone and measured lava right after it cooled, and they found it to be billions of years old.
So,
right out of the lava flow.
But don't confuse us with facts.
But we know it's just a year old sometimes. They've had things like this, like bloopers in their science.
So then when I asked them to consider these 3 points that I raised, you know, first of all, that the fossil column is false, and that hominids are a hoax, and radiometrics are riddled, I seldom got much response in the way of retort to this. Any good response to indicate that there was a really good defense for the hypothesis of evolution or Darwinism or punctuated equilibrium, many of these evolutionary theories. So I found that very interesting. And that's one of the reasons why
that's why you're not an evolutionist.
Yes, and also why I spent quite a number of years involved with Creation Science Association of Ontario. And then we merged with Answers in Genesis, a worldwide organization. Ken Ham in the States. By the way, he's built a fantastic museum down in Florence, Kentucky, near Cincinnati, and I had an opportunity to visit that 4 or 5 years ago. Very interesting. And they have strong organizations in Australia, and New Zealand, and Canada, and South Africa, and in Britain. So I found that very interesting, the involvement with these people. And many of them expert scientists, PhDs in every range of science that has to do with this, and many good publications.
Well, that about wraps up our edition of TruthIsWhatMatters.com, and I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. We as always, welcome you as a guest, and we hope to have you in future episodes.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
And you do believe in creationism.
I do indeed, yes.
And I just wanted to bring in one thing that the Bible has to say on the topic. I think it's 1 Timothy 6:20 that says, "Beware of science, falsely so called."
Amen. Yes.
On that note, well, tune in again, please. Our next exciting edition of TruthIsWhatMatters.com. I'm your host, Brad Snell, along with my co-host, Ray Luff, and our very special guest this evening, Mr. Harold McCarthy. We will see you very shortly.